afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so we're going to get started. I will start with a public service announcement. We'll remind you again at the end of the session, but please remember to fill out your presentation surveys after the session. The information is used to help plan content for next year's summit, so we want to make sure that your needs are heard and the content reflects what we all want to see as evaluation and quality assurance professionals. So please complete your surveys. All right, with that, we're going to be talking about WIOA performance management dashboards, and have to have a catchy title, so putting the power in Power BI. My name is Margaret Allewine. I'm the Director of Planning and Program Evaluation for the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department. And we started down this path some years ago with a lot of help from different entities and organizations that helped inform our journey. By way of introduction, business intelligence, or BI. These are strategies and technologies that are used for data analysis of business information. It enables access to and analysis of information to improve and optimize decisions and performance. And you'll hear me refer several times to the importance of data and using it to make good decisions. So BI technologies provide historical, current, and predictive views of business operations. It's very important, I think, the more that we progress into WIOA, that we are able to take a look at historically where we've been as a VR program, where we currently are with implementing these changes, and then where we want to be, some predictive views. BI systems have been implemented by an increasing number of organizations since its emergence in the 90s, and pretty much is a standard business tool today, although it's done in a lot of different ways with a lot of different platforms. Several types of business intelligence, and I think we can agree that we all do a mix of these. They can include spreadsheets. We had some discussion in a session yesterday afternoon about the use of pivot tables and how those can be very helpful in putting together business intelligence. A lot of different types of reporting and querying software, digital dashboards, data mining, business activity monitoring, and data warehousing. So I'm going to talk a good bit about data warehousing because we saw as an agency that we needed a more robust way of approaching our data and making the most of reporting capabilities. So data warehousing. This integrates various data sources into a single data store for more informed reporting and analysis. It integrates data from multiple sources that support analytical reporting, structured or ad hoc queries, and again, as I said, decision making. A lot of our journey to being able to put the reports hub together that we have today included a lot of front-end work on working on the data warehousing. So I'll talk a little bit about how that came together. So where we were when we started this journey to a data warehouse in Power BI, we had mostly self-serve reporting in a .NET application structure, a lot of different applications. We had additional reporting that was primarily manually compiled from ad hoc query results. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the self-serve reporting and some perils that can come along with that. So we had a system that we called STARS. Sounds real impressive. And it was really impressive for its time. I think it was a great tool for our needs, and it stood for Statistical Tool and Reporting System. Now we still have this in play because we're in the midst of switching over to our data warehouse, our Power BI platform, and our reports hub. So we still go to STARS for things that we can pull readily from that statistical tool. It essentially allowed users to build their own reports by selecting parameters. So it had a series of tabs and sets of parameters that they could build their own SQL statements, and it would deliver them an Excel file. It's based on user-selected data, so depending on how much training you had and how much experience in putting those parameters together. There would be times when we'd look at some results from stars that someone had pulled, and the question came up, well, what parameters did you use? You had to be very careful in how you put those together. So with using primarily a reporting application platform, we recognized pretty quickly that there were some perils in continuing to operate in that platform. New database fields would have to be refactored into the existing applications. So anytime we had a change in our data collection, we had to change data structures, had to change user interfaces, and then we also had to change the output reports. So a lot of work went into, it could be a simple change with, like, say, referral source codes, but that would cascade through multiple of these reporting applications. In terms of the build your own reports, that gave you dynamic query generation, but as I said, you could readily introduce potential bugs, come out with invalid data, depending on your depth of knowledge and how to put that together. Now, this next sentence, I have to laugh a little bit. Sounds very technical. Aggregate queries executed against transactional database servers affect server performance. One of my IT people wrote that. But that basically means if you're running these big transactional queries and it's running against your production server, it's going to slow your system down. So you might get a call saying, hey, Margaret, are you running a big query? Because we got problems with our production server. So some of the issues that we were seeing that we wanted to make sure as we went forward, we addressed. Okay, as I mentioned, anytime there were changes to the data collection and how those were structured in the reporting applications, we would have to go back in, and I say we collectively, the team, mostly IT staff, and make adjustments to all of these different reporting applications, anywhere that data cascaded. So policy directives. We're likely most of us familiar with the case service report, fondly known as the 911. We've had a few changes in the 911 over the past several years. We started out through 2016, a little over 200 data elements, fairly manageable. Then came along PD 16-04, so that is what we're currently using. That added 303 data elements, changed a lot of those data elements around, added a ton of new elements. So we were looking at, okay, we got to change our structure for how we do our applications and our reporting. So we also know that coming next July, we've got PD 19-03, which while it did not add a lot of elements, it either modified, deleted, or added a few new ones. So as I gave the example, referral source. Some of those codes are changing. Some of the other elements that in the current 911 are different elements they're combining, and it's different options for that. So if you think about the number of reporting applications that we have and how many changes we would have to cascade that through, and then the ones that you don't catch until it's the end of the year and you got to pull some end of the year stats and you recognized, hey, we missed this one. We got to update it with the new coding. So we recognized at the pace of change that we really had to move away from reporting applications and move us into a data warehouse and a structure that could more readily meet our needs. Also, we listened to our users. And we had a lot of input from our field staff, from our supervisors that were saying, I've seen these dashboard things out there. I know they're possible. We'd like one of those. Can we get some of these reports that are spread out over a long period of time or many places and put them in one place? Let's get on the dashboard train. So tech-savvy users needed more. We've got a lot of multi-generations in the workplace, and people are used to now interacting with data in different ways, so they would like to see it in those different ways. So we had internal customers that were requesting more modern dashboards to track all those different metrics from one place. We wanted to be able to more quickly put data visualizations together that could convey the information more quickly than just a chart of the numbers, so helping to tell the story. And we find also that if we're doing a good job in presenting the story of the data, when we give answers, it often leads to more questions. So we want to be able to follow up on those questions in a timely manner and stay engaged with what we want to know organizationally. So what did it take to put this together and to pull it off? We put a project team together that included specialists within our IT department, so a database administrator who looked at the SQL server installations, design, performance tuning, helping with report development. So we had a technical lead that was helping to orchestrate some of the front-end work on the data warehouse. Database specialist, which helped to develop those ETL processes. Extract, transform, and load is what that stands for, and also end user reports. This was the person that really got in the weeds in terms of how we built that data warehouse, what parameters we needed to make sure we were mindful of. We had an IT analyst that helped with translating database speak to what the programmatic staff was really asking for. Communication with our administration, identifying what those different data sources are, data analysis, and very importantly, verification of the report accuracy. So as we built these, having verification to make sure that what was going into the data warehouse was accurate and appropriate. And then our program evaluation team to help coordinate that feedback, to help with development of what those data visualizations look like, to help go out and seek input and feedback from the users to say, is this meeting your needs? Would you like to see it a different way? Stop along the way asking for input on how it was coming together. We also did research to look at how this had been done in other states. We did call on our friends in Alabama. Don't know if any Alabama folks are in the room. Hi there. We had several webinars and phone calls and talked a good bit with some folks from the Alabama team on how they had approached this in the past. We did have some consultant input on the front end part of the data warehouse and putting it together. We did some independent research within our team to see the best approaches to this. And then we also sent several folks for some in-person training with the Microsoft Power BI folks. So we recognized at a certain point, there's so far you can go with a instruction manual and wealth of knowledge in IT applications, but there are times when you need to get in the room with the people that built the software and get some answers as to how we were approaching it and if that was the right way to go. So that was a critical piece as well. An overview of how the BI architecture looks. This looks fairly complicated, and I will not try to get in the weeds on the technical piece, but it essentially allows for taking the data from our production servers. So as I mentioned earlier, making sure that we had a report server that was separate from our production server so we didn't run into any performance issues. So data coming from those production database servers, going into a staging database, and this is a critical piece because you have to make sure that you have scrubbed the data, so to speak, making sure that we have deduplicated, that we've verified accuracy, that we have organized it in the correct way, and then passing it through over to a report server which houses the data once it's gone through that scrubbing process and is then available for users. So having that staging database and moving it over, there are several pieces to that puzzle. The SQL Server Integration Services are one of those things that allow the building of the data warehouse. SQL Server Analysis Services, that's what runs on the report server that allows you to build those reports dynamically. Power BI Desktop, that's what several of our power users, as we call them, work from to help with building those visualizations. So we can say, hey, I need this data set because we want to try out some different visualizations. And so we have the Power BI desktop. We get the data set loaded in. We can do all the legwork on how to best visualize, lay it out, before we get into the step-by-step of building the actual reports. Ultimately, they reside on the report server. So as I mentioned, there's the staging database. That's the temporary holding area that it goes to before the deduplication and loading it into the data warehouse. So by the time that data gets into the data warehouse, we know that it is accurate. The data warehouse database houses those tables that are then used to generate those reports. Okay. I mentioned the ETL processes, the extract, transform, and load. That basically is how the IT folks tell the database to transfer that from production to the staging or from staging to the data warehouse. And then we also implemented using the SQL Server Integration Services package to help make that happen. Those processes, and this is important also in terms of performance, are executed on a scheduled basis so that it happens during intervals of minimum system use. I'll speak in a little bit about when the updates and the refresh happens, but any data cleanup happens at this point before it gets into the data warehouse, which is its final destination. Quick word about Power BI Desktop. This is a Microsoft product, and so as much of our data and much of our information was on SQL servers, we wanted something that would work well with that. It's an analytics tool used to create data models and develop reports with interactive visualizations. It also integrates with the server to allow publishing of reports to a portal. So that gives us the report server that hosts the Power BI reports. We can pull them down in different formats if we want to pull them into a PDF, pull them into an Excel file, that can be done. It's accessed through a secure web portal, and any web browser will do. So you can go through Chrome, you can go through Explorer. It is behind our firewall, so it is on our secure server, but any of our staff, once we fully roll it out, will be able to access it. And the great part of building that portal was we could customize it. We could make it look however we wanted to based on what our users really needed. So that was a lot of technical speak about the legwork that brought us to this point. Why? Why would we be doing this? Why invest all of these resources other than, wanting to make the best use of our data? And a lot of this gets back to change management. Why do we want to be very intentional and very mindful about how we introduce all this new data and these new performance measures to our staff? We recognize that with a change as big as WIOA, that it was going to take a while for us to achieve that cultural change. It's still a work in progress. I think folks in the room would agree that we continue to work on this. But for effective change management, and this is from the Harvard Business Review, you need to not just tell employees that organizational changes are coming, you need to explain why. So helping to lay the groundwork before we put these into place. Present a compelling vision for the future. Keep employees informed by providing regular communications. Empowering leaders and managers to lead through the change. And then finding creative ways to involve employees in the change. So we were thinking about how to best get this information in front of folks and to use it as a mechanism for change management. Said another way, making sure that you clearly define the change and align it to your business goals, so that's a key piece. A lot of this with the common performance measures, until it hits your bottom line, it sounds pretty theoretical. It's like, yeah, we get that, we understand that. I'm gonna keep doing my work until it hits my bottom line. So aligning it with business goals, determining impacts and those affected, again, communication strategy, providing effective training. So we've used a lot of these tools as we've gone around and done training on the common performance measures and where we are as a state thus far. Implementing a support structure, and I'll talk a little bit more about how some of these tools are now helping our supervisors to actively manage some of those data validation and performance management issues, and then also being able to measure the change process. So in moving from the standards and indicators, which we all knew and loved for so many years, to those common performance measures, we had to develop ways of putting this in front of people and training to it and teaching to it during a baseline period, which is not the easiest thing to do when, you know, folks really want a concrete target. So we wanted to introduce this information in the context of change management, and so we have embarked on that journey. So this is I know this is probably hard to see at the back of the room, but the Reports Hub itself looks pretty familiar in terms of organization. So it's in a folder structure. There are different topically driven folders that will drill down to the reports. We've got some of the tried and true things that we have used in terms of specialty areas. We have a separate folder for the WIOA Common Performance Measures, and I'll show some examples of that in a moment. We also tie in some key performance indicators that give you that dashboard view. There are a couple of different types of reports that we have worked our way through. So the Power BI reports are the ones that have the great visualizations, the graphics, the charts. We also have some what we call paginated reports. Those are more of you download it to Excel in order to work with it. We're not quite there with the visualizations, but we had to have some tools to give supervisors something to manage by, particularly with some of the data elements that need that feed into the common performance measures. I'm usually a pretty low-key kind of person, but when I was sitting in our BI meetings, I said, I gotta have something. Y'all have to give me something so our supervisors know what's being entered at any given time, particularly around skill gains and credential attainment. It was a critical piece for us to put in. Okay. This is a screenshot of the KPI dashboard, and again, this has a lot of our tried and true input and output measures. So we've got the number of people being served at any given time. We've got the number of consumers that are working. So that data element that we enter at the start of employment, tough learning curve on that for us to operationalize, but the big takeaway is that we have a more accurate count at any given time of how many of our consumers are working. So we put that on the KPI dashboard. It also gives us some comparative data, but more visually. So in some of our traditional reports, we would have kind of a chart of numbers that said how many new referrals, how many are active on your caseload, how many are in different statuses, how many have gone to work. This gives us the comparison on a chart basis on where we were compared to this time last year. So we can kind of see as we're going through some of these changes, where are our comparisons and is there anything of concern. There are some graphics in here that will change from green to red if you're not on target with prorated goals. So one thing we were able to do here is to build in the capacity for loading in those prorated goals, and then it will flag, hey, if you're on track or not on track, so it can give some visual cues there. We also pulled in the context of pulling stuff into one place. We had the traditional, caseload report with the inputs and outputs. We had a separate report on budget information. And so we knew it was very important for us to pull in the whole picture as much as possible. So we included information on area budgets, caseload budgets, where they were compared to prorated goals. So it's a good one-stop shop for seeing where a lot of these performance indicators are. This is one of the new ones, and we designed this to be able to track our employment after exit and median earnings. And so basically we built out just, pretty basic reports, but this shows you for the most recent period of time where we have the unemployment insurance wage data, what those results are. So in the context of change management and making sure our staff understood, the basics of the performance measures, but also it starts to make more sense when you can pull something up and drill down to their area and say, here's where your area is on this. And here's where your area has been for the past year or so. So we've got data going back to cases that were closed in year 2015. So we've got a good stretch of baseline data. And we use this to start with as a training tool. So when I'm going around doing training in our area offices on the performance measures, where we currently are, our move towards setting performance targets and goals around this, I give it in a recognizable sheet of paper as a handout and starting to get people familiar. So when they see this on the screen and they start to interact with it, hopefully they'll remember some of that training session and say, yeah, someone talked about that. It looks familiar, but this gives capability to drill down not only by year, but also by our regions, by our area offices, and by our caseloads. So we can start to see and start to analyze what looks different in different areas for these performance measures. Where is it going over time? We were very happy to see that for cases that we closed in fiscal year 17, an improvement from those to our cases closed in 2018. So we're seeing these go in the right direction. So starting to see some directionality with where these lagging indicators are going is a good thing. That gives us a good sign, I believe. We also built one for median earnings, and so this shows for that previous year closures where those median earnings were. We wanted to be able to see also different periods of time for when different cases were closed. So, one of those questions that may lead to more questions is, do cases we closed in first quarter look any different than the cases we closed in fourth quarter? And so that's been interesting to see. Again, we can drill down by regions, by areas, all with drop downs. We added into this the capacity to, I think one of the cool things about the BI visualizations is being able to add slicers. And so we added one for supported employment, because as we were going around doing training, talking about, hey, we're going to start looking at setting goals, one of the discussion points was always, well, earnings are going to look different for different groups. How do we address that? How about folks that may be receiving supported employment services? So we added a slicer, and we can see what these look like for those individuals that are receiving supported employment services. So some of those things in the baseline period we want to get a handle on. We recognize also that different caseloads may look a little different. So before we jump in and set goals at that level, we got to take a look at those factors. A transition caseload that is primarily students that are exiting high school, if they're not going on for additional training, their earnings may look a bit different than a general caseload. So we wanted to be able to look at that. We also included some descending and ascending charts that kind of give the lay of the land for all of the different areas, because that was also a question. None of us are competitive at all, and we don't want to know where our counterparts are with these measures. So we gave them a chart that said, here's all the areas. Take a look at where you are in comparison. Not a competition, but just an awareness of where different areas were with the state. So this can help us with identifying where we may need to dig in and see a little bit more about what's going on. Okay, these are some of our newest, and when I was saying I gotta have something for our supervisors to use, these are some of the paginated reports, and they give us information on the skill gains that have been entered. So in this particular view, this would be through program year 18 and through quarter 4, statewide totals. And as we were reviewing and looking at data validation, anybody having issues or questions about 84 and 85, data elements 84 and 85? Sometimes I see deer in the headlights look with that, but we had to make sure that we had tools in place that identified, until we could get the edits built into our case management system, who's missing some of that stuff. So, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the audience participation. I'm glad I'm not alone on this. So we had to have some tools because we were seeing in our data, hey, we're recording a lot of skills gains. It's increasing. That tells us that the training is taking effect. But we've still got some that we have some gaps that we need to close in our edits, in our case management system. So we had some with skill gains recorded, but they weren't enrolled. There was no data enrolled in 85. I just saw on the most recent edit specs that came out from RSA that that's going to be added, I believe, to the next round of edit specifications. So we're glad to be getting out in front of that. And so that's one thing that we had to take a look at. The other piece of this is that supervisors can use this to drill down to those individual case levels so they can identify, okay, let me see who we have entered skill gains on for secondary skill gains. And let me see down to the case consumer level, what's being entered, and is that accurate? Is that in line with our training? We have some areas that we could see pretty readily once we had this view that, hey, we need to go back in and do some additional training because either we weren't seeing much in some of these categories where we knew there should be more, or we might have some that were disproportionately large that we said, we might need to dig in. And so this is going to be a great tool for us to take the next step and really build out our data validation procedures for taking a look at what's being entered on our skill gains. Similarly with credential attainment, we did a similar build for this paginated report, and again, we can drill this down to the area, caseload, and consumer level, which tells us what's that population of consumers that are enrolled in training or education. Element number 84, as we fondly know it, and then how many of those folks have a credential recorded. So again, another tool to give our supervisors and also our evaluation and QA staff some tools to see where we are in entering this data. You'll see at the bottom it says information as of 9/2/19 at 4 a.m. I did not pull this at 4 a.m., but we have designators that show when the information was most recently loaded. So as I said earlier, we wanted to minimize any impact on our production servers. So these refresh every morning, and they do it at 4 a.m. The new batch of data is loaded. It's up and ready to go, and folks can see. We had a big push at the end of the year to go back and correct some things that we saw in the data, and this allowed us to give some tools, and the supervisors would say, all right, I cleaned a bunch up, or I've entered a lot. What does it look like today? So they can go back in and dynamically have some real-time information. All right, y'all, I know y'all can't see that in the back, but pre-employment transition services. We needed to have some tools, and I think RSA is doing a great thing with the dashboards that they're issuing that are giving us some of that performance data. But we want to be able to see it in real time and actively manage it, and also compare it, have some ways of validating what's coming to us through the RSA dashboards, what we have internally, making sure that everything is matching up, everything is correct. So this will give us our current stats on by each of the required activities for pre-employment transition services, those different counts, both for consumers and for potentially eligible students, and then some totals on all consumers or potentially eligible students that received at least one pre-ET service. So we could tell from looking at our 2018 to our 2019 totals that we had a dramatic increase in what we were recording and reporting in our pre-eds. So a key piece to make sure that we're on track with that. All right. This is a great example of some of the power that you can build in with these data visualizations. We had a need organizationally, and our fearless leader knew that she needed to be able to pull information on consumer status at any given time. So of our active consumers, what does that look like? Previously, it may have taken several queries and several folks putting it together to create those visualizations. Now this is available that can be pulled as needed. That shows the breakdown of consumers that are in plan status. So we wanted that snapshot to be able to monitor and see where these things are. This also can be pulled by some different parameters, so we can break it down by impairment. We can also break it down by age, by transition status, so what percentage of our population actively served is student population, youth population, by some of those different factors. So this is a great tool that will allow us to kind of slice down into the data. This also can come down to the area, office, and caseload level. So it gives us some great tools to be able to see in terms of who we're serving and what that looks like in a graphical format, but also in an on-demand format. We're in the process of building out, so this is an as of right now view. We've got some in the works that will let us see at periods of time. So we can compare across multiple years where we have been and what it looks like now. So you can see some of those programmatic trends and shifts. Again, we could pull this the old-fashioned way, but this is just a really cool tool to be able to put it in the visualization you want and have access to it readily. All right. We also have some different views of this, and so these are consumer counts that give you percent of student participants, youth, and percent of youth participants. I think we have all seen, as we have implemented WIOA and pre-employment transition services, the makeup of our population and who we're serving is changing pretty dramatically, so we want to keep a handle on what that looks like. There's some folks that do like to see things in a chart, in a graph, in a visualization. There was some discussion yesterday that inherently there's some accessibility issues that we need to be mindful of, that we need to make sure that we're taking into account. So there are also folks that may want to see this just these are called cards. So that first KPI, like the big dashboard, we've got a view that has all of that information, but it's just in separate cards that give the stats. So there are lots of different ways that this can be viewed. So accessibility, something we need to be mindful of and work our way through as we're using this, but I think the bottom line is this gives us a very dynamic way of using the data, of interacting with the data, and making sure that we can readily provide the information needed for decision making. That's really the bottom line of all this. So a quick shout out to the team. For our IT folks, we had many IT folks involved as well as program evaluation. Truly a team effort, and we are very excited as we move forward and continue to build out more of these reports. So that's my contact information. And in the interest of time, wanted to leave just a little bit of time for questions if anyone has any. Yes. Yes, it is uploaded to the conference app. It is not, okay. I attempted to upload it on Monday. I will check that again, but I will reload it to the conference app. I'll be glad to do that. Yes, Mary. Okay, great. Yes. That's a good question. There is the capacity to build in a lot of that query language, so to speak. I do not know in certain circumstances pulling it from the data warehouse. I think a lot of that gets worked out as we're doing those data visualizations and working through what do we want to display. And so that would be the place where we're working with the IT team to say, okay, here's the basic information, but we want to put some conditions on it. We want to say if these parameters are this, this, and this, then show us what that result is. So.
A more concrete example, something like, say if you're comparing offices within the state. Way would you create it to make it easy to do?
I believe we can. That's okay. We started with some rudimentary approaches to the basic measures, common performance measures, but we also have the capacity to build in that comparative data. One of the things that we do on the employment after exit reports is that as you drill down and look at different areas, those state cards that show your state levels remain static. So if you're looking at a particular area, you can see how they compare to the state average or to the state rate. So those comparisons we've worked through. We've got a long way to go, I think, to get to those more technical items.
And then along the same line, you have the ability that if there's certain goals, you can determine, again, using color coding, when the goals are being exceeded and when they're not being.
Yes. And so there's some navigation tools that we've built in. We tried to be as consistent as possible across the different reports so that those navigation tiles are consistent. And so the drop downs allow you to get from the statewide level to the region, the local office, and to the caseload. As those are selected, it will reflect those individual levels of goals. So for the KPI dashboard, as an example, when you click down to the caseload level, if they're not where they need to be in reference to their prorated goals on some of those parameters, it's going to show up red with an exclamation point. Some of the other visualizations that may be more of a, I'm not thinking of the technical term, but that display on more of a curve where they are compared to the goal, those would also display for that particular level. So they have loaded in those prorated goals all the way down to the caseload level. Yes?
One thing you mentioned was that comparison data that being able process improvement, operational issues.
Yes, and I'll give you an example of that. It gets back to some of the new data elements that feed into the common performance measures. And so what we have seen and what we've been working through, and I think it helps heighten the focus and importance, is where we see gaps in what's being entered for skill gains, as an example. It lets us identify, okay, for our case management system, we have to have clear labeling on what those data elements are. We have to have a process for integrating where those data elements get entered within that case management system. So we've still got a handful of those data elements that are kind of in a standalone program that folks have to remember to go out to and enter those elements. So we're in the process of moving the rest of those into our regular workflow within the case management system. So it's allowed us to see where some of those priorities need to be in getting those moved in to the regular workflow. It also helps us to see where we have had some edits in the logic of what will allow some data entry and what may gray it out that we had to go back and correct. because we were seeing some things in the data that should have been there and they weren't there, and it allows us to, when we're doing training or talking with our field staff, and they say, well, that option's grayed out. And so that tells us, hey, we need to go fix that, because at the beginning, yeah, we thought it was solid logic. Now that we see it in operation, we got to take it out. Likewise, there are other things that we know we have to build in to make sure that there are safeguards for that data entry. Yes? Our case management system is a homegrown system, yes. We are very fortunate that they belong to our agency. We are very fortunate, yes. Here, and then I'll come there. It was several years in the making because we had to, on the front end, do the research and identify what platform was going to be the best. There was some discussion yesterday afternoon about Tableau and its benefits, other ways of looking at this, and also in the context of just the massive changes that were required with the 9/11 changes, and how do we integrate that with this project, which was pretty massive. So we did identify on the front end, on the project planning, that, yeah, it's going to take some resources to make this happen. It was a multi-year and continues to be a multi-year project, but we felt it was important enough for us to be able to have this information more dynamically to help with our training and putting it in front of people. We did have a consultant that came in on the front end, and that was specifically around the data warehouse and how to best structure that. All right, back in the room. Both. So we do have some that will, as the counselors and other staff are entering data elements, there are some that will create an edit or disallow entries in subsequent things that would make sense. Most of those we aligned with anything that was in the 9/11 edit specifications, limited as they were at the beginning, but increasingly so. So we started there. But we also run an errors and anomalies report before we submit our 9/11, and that catches things on the back end that maybe we haven't thought through or gotten into our case management system yet, that we do before we submit our 9/11.
Does that affect reports that you're
So when there are corrections, there are certain types of corrections that the field can make themselves. There are others that we ask them to send through our IT help desk, and in particular, if it's around measurable skill gains, where there is time-sensitive reporting, if it's within a program year, that we can't have a lot of change to that data without managing it for the purposes of keeping our 9/11 data clean. We ask that any of those measurable skill gain changes, if there are errors or changes that are needed, those come through our IT help desk, so we can help keep any issues with changes to data after the program year would be minimized. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a great question, and one that we're currently still working through to get the best result that we feel we need. Currently, there is one central location, and 85 is still in that standalone program where we haven't fully integrated it into the case management system workflow. So they have to go to that new federal elements program. One of these days, we've got to quit calling it new because it's not new anymore, but they have to go there to enter that date of enrollment. Our stopgap that we're building in will create an edit if they enter a measurable skill gain in any of the 343 through 347 data elements. It will give them a dialog box that says if they don't have a date already, hey, you need a date here, please enter it. So it won't let them go forward in the future. We're building in that edit. That also we recognize is also after the fact. So we're thinking through how do we make sure, in addition to training, that if there are other ways that we can identify folks that are in training and education that should be leading to skill gains, we really push in training that you need to enter that date as soon as they are enrolled. But our safeguards will be, for the meantime, if they enter a skill gain and don't have a date enrolled, then it's going to force them to enter a date of enrollment.
So this separate, just a quick follow-up. Staff through training need to remember
We are in the process of moving it in to the normal workflow where it would be as they are going through and hopefully tied to our IPE program. So if they're putting training or education on the IPE, it'll collect it possibly from there. We're working through the logistics of how to best integrate it into the case management system. So there's several places and several times that it could come into play. At the time we take an application, they might be already enrolled. And, you know, it needs to be embedded in our application process, needs to tie in with the IPE. So I think there's several points that it can be built in, that we can help ensure that it's in front of people. The other tool that we're using, and again, it's a little bit after the fact, but it's what we have right now, is that real-time report that will show them who do you have enrolled, who have you recorded a skill gain on that needs a date of enrollment, and they can actively manage that.
Yeah, thanks for your insight. That was a big challenge for us in Pennsylvania. Build in these new components under the new, build a separate, simple place where staff can go just to enter this hindsight has made things more complex for us. As the 9/11 requirements have continued to evolve and change, now we've
Right.
so I'm always curious to hear how other states are approaching that.
You're welcome. And we did take a stepwise approach to that. As we first got started, we're like, we have to have it all. We got to start July 1. So we had pretty much all of the data elements in a separate system, and we have integrated those, and just the skills gain and training and education components are kind of the ones that we have left to integrate. And so what I would envision it will look like is we will have within the system, if it's education related, we'll have a section that has all those education related elements. If it's skills gain related, we'll have those elements in one place. Similarly with credentials, so that we can also build in some prompts. We would like to be able to give people some tools if they have someone enrolled in post-secondary education and there are some time frames that we would expect them to be looking for grade reports or transcripts. If that time period goes by, then a prompt will tell them, or they can pull a listing of, here are all my training cases. It's January, December, January, end of the semester. I need to be looking for grade reports or transcripts so that they can have some better tools to have a view of who's in education and training, and some prompts that will help them to be able to enter those skill gains.
Smart, thanks.
Yes? Mm-hmm. That's a great point, and I think you have to have some of that blended approach because, again, as we're looking at some of those lagging indicators, we want to track where we are, but we also want to impact those actions that are going to influence right now what those indicators look like down the road. So we really focus on, as we always have, what are we doing to get that consumer to their maximum potential? What are the things that we can do to educate them about all the training opportunities that are out there, about labor market information, you know, all the good VR stuff that we all do. We are also taking a look at within current data, what earnings at closure look like. Now, we've always kind of taken a look at that, but we are going to be looking at earnings at closure on a median basis that we think is going to be a good predictor of those median earnings after exit. So we're trying to tie in some of those earnings information at closure with ultimately what those lagging indicators will look like. So that's an example of one that we're putting into play for things that we can manage right now that are going to be good indicators down the road. But that's been a tough thing. So I'm getting the high sign, the 3-minute warning. So any final questions before we wrap up? Yes. It's all from the SQL Server. So we do not currently use SPSS, and basically it's a combination of primarily our 9/11 data elements, as well as any data elements and points that are captured either through our case management system or other points from that SQL server. Thank you all very much for your attention and for your questions. I think we are all going through a similar journey. Again, please remember to fill out your conference surveys and I believe CRC credits. Great. Thank you very much.